Chapter 12 of Clearing Weather. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Nicole J. LaBeouf. Clearing Weather by Cornelia Meigs. Gunfire. In the matter over which Michael had been feeling the most concern for his friend, his cares had been heedless. All else seemed to have gone against Nicholas Drury. Only one thing remained to stay and steady him. The people of Branscombe still stood firmly behind him. There had been no voice raised of complaint or reproach to torment further his already tortured spirit. Perhaps within some of those little low-roofed cottages along the waterside, some good wife, as she was putting the children to bed, would murmur a little to her man, if things had not gone so ill, if the Jocasta— but her husband would only shake his head and say, "Good or bad fortune, the sea knows how to bring them both. Speak no ill of Nicholas Drury. If it were not for him, there would not even be a roof above our heads." Women talking together on the street corners, sometimes with voices querulous or sorrowful, would fall into silence when Nicholas Drury chanced to walk past them, and one would say to another after he was gone, "He carries courage upon his face, but it is plain to see none the less that the lad's heart is near to breaking." As he came trudging homeward along Branscombe Head on that morning after the burning of the brig Betsy, Nicholas, when he came close, could see the harbour alive with small boats which, since long before daylight, had been searching the rocky shore for him. Old John Ewing, who had been badly burned about the hands and face when he first discovered the fire and attempted to quench the uncontrollable flames, had refused to be taken home until he could be certain what had happened to Master Nicholas. Great was the rejoicing when it was found that the fire had spared him, and that he was safe. The Betsy, wedged between two boulders just inside the point, had burned to the water's edge, with such damage within that even her stout hull offered no hope for salvage. Lest she drift out into the tideway, Nicholas gave orders that she should be broken up where she lay. "She will make good firewood, at least," he commented grimly within himself. "The blaze which her timbers would kindle might serve to warm one heart, at least, or maybe two. How Darius Corland and Joseph Ryle would love to spread their hands to that welcome fire." He had completed this task 3 days after the loss of the little brig, and had walked home to the Blackbird Inn, slowly turning over in his thoughts the problem of what was to be done next. He had girded himself to face the future with courage, and he would do so, even though the days before him looked an utter blank. Yet his spent mind could not compass any plan as he now struggled and pondered and wrestled with the question, sitting beside the window in the little room which looked upon the garden. Summer had not yet yielded to the coolness of early autumn, and the brilliant night was hot, with the moon sailing majestically through the schools of little clouds which played about her course like darting silver fish. Black rounds of shadow lay below the plum trees, but the open spaces between them, where the dew had beaded the grass, were as white in the moonlight as though overlaid with hoar-frost. Nicholas got up to stand at the open window, resting his elbow against the frame, and looking out with scarcely seeing eyes, while he went over and over again that harshly demanding question, "What next? What next?" Very slowly his half-conscious attention began to be caught by a certain small but curious detail visible in the garden outside. The smooth glitter of moon-bright dew was broken here and there in regular succession, as by footsteps reaching up through the garden from the marsh road. He looked again, And yet again, there could be no mistaking. Here once more was that same line of footprints coming up from the sea. Hoar frost and dew, moonlight and morning had passed 100 times since, but before his eyes at last was that same record of someone stealing past the marsh and slipping through the garden amongst the plum trees. As he leaned out through the window to look more carefully, he was aware of a low sound almost at his elbow. In the black shadow at the angle of a jutting chimney, someone was standing concealed. Someone who was watching him and now was laughing. "Etienne!" he cried, and with the word was out into the garden. "I have been watching you this half-hour long," said that gay, well-remembered voice. "I landed in the cove, just where I took leave of you, and came up by the way I followed before, not knowing just what friends of yours might be lodging in the inn, and who might be more than pleasantly anxious to see Etienne Bardot." "Come in, come in. There is no one here to molest you," Nicholas urged, and brought the wanderer inside. When they were within the circle of candlelight, the Frenchman gave Nicholas one searching glance and cried out, "Saints of heaven, my dear, dear friend, what trouble has come to you? And where is Michael Slade?" I had hoped you might have brought me news of him," stammered Nicholas. He drew forth a chair and, sitting down beside his friend, poured out to him the whole tale of what had come and gone since their meeting. Etienne listened with grave eyes upon the boy's face, his expression never changing from the beginning of the story to the end. Michael, Darius Corland, Hezekiah Truman and his tall companion, the Jocasta and the Betsy, he heard in full about them all. "And no tidings have ever come back to you of the Jocasta after she sailed away?" he asked, when Nicholas had finally done. "One letter from the West Indies, which said that another would follow it so soon as a second northbound ship was to be found," the boy answered. "And you, in all those places where you have been, have you not chanced even to hear anyone speak of her?" Etienne slowly shook his head. "I have been in many ports, on our side of the Atlantic, the Baltic, the Mediterranean, England, and Spain. I have visited them all in these 2 years, and nowhere have I heard even the mention of her name." There was quiet while Nicholas, with silent struggle, accepted this stifling of his last hope. "So be it," he said finally, and got up from his chair. "A long-looked-for friend must sup before he talks of anything more. Shall I bring you in a fine, tall, brimming tankard of home-brewed ale?" The unhappy gravity of Etienne's face broke into the radiance of laughter as he replied, "Whatever has been lost, there is still here the bravest heart which I have ever known. Craving your pardon, most hospitable monsieur, I will not drink ale tonight, but you will find me a veritable rival of our French giant Gargantua in the consumption of bread and cheese." Nicholas's hasty explanation in the kitchen may not have conveyed much to Phoebe and Dolly, but it put them upon their mettle none the less to set before his mysterious friend the very best which the inn afforded. Dolly brought it in to the table in the little room. Cynical Joseph Ryle had compared her manner to a duchess-in-waiting, but this evening her manner had the stateliness of Queen Elizabeth, spiced strangely with that sparkling smile which savoured of a peering hamadryad in a wood. She and Etienne crossed glances, exchanged a word or two upon Nicholas's introduction, and 3 moments afterward were in the lively conversation of well-established friends. Even before her, the Frenchman spoke plainly of his hopes and plans. "We who have thought to help France forward toward her liberty," he said, "are now striving with all our strength to hold her back a little from the headlong course into which she is about to throw herself. Old and terrible abuses will have, I fear, only terrible remedies, in which innocent will suffer as well as guilty. We have not the cool heads of Anglo-Saxons, and between high and low we have given and received unspeakable wrong." When Dolly had gone, and when Etienne had almost consumed the supper which, so he said, King Louis XVI would have been glad to sit down to that night, he suddenly put aside his talk of great affairs and said abruptly, "There is a special matter of which I must speak before further time passes. It has to do with that man for whom the name of Hezekiah Truman is as good as any other. Has it occurred to you that it was his hand which set fire to your little ship Betsy?" "I have had small doubt of it," answered Nicholas heavily, "but I have not yet thought of what steps I should take in the matter. And I have wished also to speak of this letter of Darius Corlin's which I have guarded so long. It has been of great service to me, in making me feel that he is not a man for awe and fear as I, like everyone else, had once thought him. But beyond that it has no usefulness in my hands. I should be glad to be rid of it." He went back to give his friend a somewhat more detailed account of Darius Corlin's efforts to reclaim his property, of the hired assaults, the pleadings at last, the final threats, and those significant words of John Ewing concerning the fire on the brig. It just burst forth suddenly as it might be a volcano within her. "It all agrees with certain things which I also have heard," declared Etienne. "You will remember that this Hezekiah calls himself, in his own crooked way, a friend of mine. This is not the first time since my ship put into your harbor last night that I have come ashore. I did not care to show my face in the Branscombe market-place again, for that might have led to inconvenience and delay, if nothing worse. It was so late when we cast anchor that I did not believe I would find you awake even if I came to seek you. Yet I was in such haste for tidings concerning you that I slipped ashore hard upon midnight and visited one of those small taverns at the waterside where the candles burn all night long. It chanced that I there fell in with our common acquaintance, Monsieur Hezekiah, and was by him introduced to his long companion, who passes by the name of Travers. Hezekiah thinks that he has some common bond with me. It happens that he knows that I, like him, go about the world with a surname which is not my own." "But your purposes are not quite the same," smiled Nicholas. "Not precisely, but that Hezekiah does not quite grasp. He made me one of their party in the most friendly manner. Though I did not hear any of the news of you which I had been seeking, I heard a great confusion of facts spilled abroad, some of which I thought I could connect with your affairs. The man Travers was less profuse in his communications, but he was possessed by the blackest and most deadly rage which I have ever witnessed. They have both come into complete disaccord with their former employer. Hezekiah has fallen in and out with him a baker's dozen of times, but now he declares that he is done forever with serving so mean a master. It seems that there is no established schedule of payment for setting fire to ships, and that he and Darius have disagreed sadly over the question of what it is worth." Nicholas chuckled in appreciative understanding. "They are an ill-assorted crew," he observed. "I had already gathered that all has not gone peaceably amongst the three of them." "I think that now the ill-will on all sides has been wrought to dangerous pitch," Etienne went on. "I, for myself, would little like to be the object of such enmity as that tall, lantern-jawed devil was professing for Monsieur Darius. They both said that it was their purpose to visit him tonight at his house beyond the town to demand a reckoning. I have thought that you and I also, Nicholas, might take our way thither, and make final arrangement with Monsieur Corlind in this matter of the letter. I would that we could force him to make restitution for the loss of the Betsy." "I will never take money from him," Nicholas declared stoutly. "Moreover, we should have to prove his share in the destruction of the brig. To do that, we would need the help of Hezekiah Truman, and with him I will have no more to do." "There you are most wise," Etienne agreed. But at least this is an excellent occasion for us to present ourselves and our business before Monsieur Courland. Hezekiah is too firm a friend of mine to do harm to us at Darius's bidding. And while that rascal and his comrade rogue are there, Monsieur Courland would never dare to set the watch upon me. He could not even summon that gentle constable who sat so comfortably for half an hour below me in good Grey Dobbin's shed. This was a plan to which Nicholas agreed most readily. He was anxious to be rid of the letter by any means, and could scarcely wait for a moment's delay now that the way was finally open. He ran out to saddle the grey horse for Etienne, and to recover the letter from its dusty hiding-place. He procured another mount in the village, and in scarcely more than half an hour the two were clattering down the moonlit road toward the big house 2 miles away. It was there that Thomas Drury had lived, and there Nicholas and Dolly had been brought up, but it was the abode now of Darius Courland. Nicholas was not an unskilful rider, but he made no such figure upon his borrowed mount as did the erect and graceful Etienne Bardot. More than once the boy, glancing at his companion upon the jogging Dobbin, thought that, in his rough sailor's coat, with his cutlass girded at his side, the Frenchman looked like some great lord, who should have been equipped with a silver-hilted sword and with a high-stepping, blooded charger. The moonlit road was quite empty of travel, in spite of the warmth and beauty of the clear night. Once, as they mounted to the top of a hill, they seemed to see a pair of moving dots toiling along the way before them, which disappeared from sight as the two dropped down to the valley of a stream. They reached, finally, the entrance of the big, pillared house, standing back from the road at the head of an avenue of trees. How curious it seemed to be rapping for admission at the door of that dwelling which Nicholas still thought of as home. He thumped the shining knocker, waited a little, then struck sharply again. "It is strange that no one answers," he said to Etienne. "There are lights in the windows, and I thought that I heard voices as we came up the drive." The panelled door itself was standing slightly ajar, so that finally he pushed it open, and they both went in. There were candles burning on the table in the hall. Others, in sconces on the wall, lighted the broad mahogany-railed staircase which led upward before them. There was no sign of any person, servant or master, in the big quiet house. Now and then an unexplained sound of thumping came up from some region below, and faintly, down the stair, floated a vague murmuring of voices. "Mr. Courland must be in my uncle's study at the head of the stairs," Nicholas said, and led the way upward. The sound grew louder as they mounted, not from their approaching nearer, but from the rising of the voices in excitement or anger. Finally, as they reached the last step, there came a great bellow of rage, then an instant's silence, followed by a man's cry, high-pitched, almost a scream, of pain. Nicholas was across the hallway in one stride, but with his hand upon the door, he heard the bolt shoot inside. He struck fiercely against it, but knew well that there was little hope of breaking in that solid oak portal. "The inner room!" he cried to Etienne, and raced down the hall, darted in at the first opening, flew through a bedchamber, and flung open the smaller door which gave upon the study. He was not a second too soon, for as he plunged over the threshold, he flung aside a short, square man who was striving to slam the door and turn the lock. Just as he won his way inside, with Etienne at his back, there came a great crashing of glass and the thud of a heavy body thrown violently against the wall. The man before him gave over at once his struggle to lock the door, and spun about to fling himself again into the struggle for which he had left for a single instant. The 4-branched candlestick upon the table had been overturned and lay upon the floor, sputtering but still burning. Another still stood upon the mantel and showed Darius Courland, crowded into the corner beside the tall window, helpless in the hands of Tom Travers and Hezekiah. They had not assailed him with knife or pistol. They were beating him, smiting him with one terrific blow after another, pounding him backward against the panels, then shaking him back and forth as though he were a great inert sack of grain. Somebody's shoulder had been thrust through the window, and the falling glass had cut them all. Darius's face was running blood. Hezekiah's cheek was scored. There was a great gash across the knuckles of the long hand with which Tom Travers clutched his enemy's throat. Nearer the door, limp and senseless, lay Joseph Ryle, sprawling along the wall, just where the two had tossed him aside before they fell upon Darius. "Hold!" ordered Etienne. "Would you kill the man?" "Yes," roared Tom Travers, "that is what we would do, exactly that. Not easily, mercifully, with a bullet or a sword, but thus, and thus, and thus." With each of the last words he swung the great body against the solid wall, as easily as a furious hound will shake and toss a captured woodchuck. The two were, indeed, like a pair of fierce dogs, who, after growling, sullen, ill-treated service, had of a sudden turned to rend their master. "He hired me for crime and treason," panted out Tom Travers again, "then laughed at me and told me that he would give me up to the law. Said that he held my life in his hand. I'll show him who holds life and death here. I will show him again, and again, and again." Once more he fell to raining blows upon the scarcely struggling victim whom the two held between them. Etienne whipped out his sword. "We will not see murder done," he cried. There was a flash of steel and a yell of pain from Travers as he released his hold upon Darius Corlin's throat and stepped back, clapping his hand to his arm. At the same moment Nicholas crooked a steel taut elbow about the neck of the struggling Hezekiah and jerked him backwards. Darius Corlin, released, sank against the wall, then slumped slowly and heavily, first to his knees, then into a heap upon the floor. Etienne swung about upon Hezekiah, still wrestling and writhing in the grasp of Nicholas. "Get you gone from here," he commanded, giving the man a name which the boy had never heard before. "You have called yourself my friend, but from this hour you may use that word no more. Let me never look upon your face again." Hezekiah stayed not to protest. The instant Nicholas's arm had released him, he was out through the door and down the stairs. The front door slammed with an echoing crash behind his flight. Tom Travers stood leaning against the mantel, gasping out curses, trying vainly to lift his disabled right arm. The blood dripped from his sleeve upon the white stone hearth. "For you," said Etienne Bardot, "you may have either the sword or the gallows. Shall I or the hangman perform the very necessary duty of killing you?" The tall man regarded him with a strange, snarling smile, then, of a sudden, threw back his head with a great shout of hoarse laughter. He reached up with his left hand, caught the candlestick, and hurled it in the Frenchman's face. The lights went out, and in the darkness Nicholas heard the sound of scuffling feet, a smothered cry from Etienne, then the banging of the door. Travers, also, was gone. A wildly hammering heart, clumsily hasty fingers, and a flint and steel, all taken together, do not make for haste in the relighting of a candle. Nicholas was still fumbling vainly in the dark, when a hand tried the door from the hall. Then a glimmer of light came through the bedchamber, and a dishevelled manservant appeared upon the inner threshold. In one hand he held a candlestick, in the other a big, wavering horse-pistol. "Good heaven, Mr. Drury!" he exclaimed in delighted relief at recognizing Nicholas. "What has happened? Have they slain the master?" It was indeed a horrifying sight which the candle revealed to his eyes. The wrecked room, the smashed windows, two men upon the floor, and a third, a stranger, who sat upon a chair holding a bleeding shoulder, and who now addressed him curtly. "Put up your weapon, man. We have had enough of peril for one night. How is it you did not come sooner to your master's aid?" And to Nicholas, Etienne added, "Do not look so alarmed. The fellow struck at me with a knife under cover of the darkness, but it was an awkward blow with his left hand, and made no more than a bloody slash, which is of little consequence." The serving-man laid down his pistol upon the table, evidently glad to be rid of it. He explained as he moved back and forth, picking up and relighting the candles. "We were all in the servants' hall when those two ruffians came in, blunderbuss in hand, forced us down into the cellars, and turned the locks upon us. The windows below are barred, and it was all this time before I could force the door. The others are still afraid to come up." Nicholas was about to tear away the sleeve of Etienne's coat and shirt to examine the knife wound, but the Frenchman motioned him toward Darius Corland. "It is not I, but that one who is in extremity." The serving-man and Nicholas between them managed to lift Darius from the floor and lay him upon a couch. His face was mottled with purple, and his breath came only at intervals and in great gasps. Nicholas sent the man for water, for linen to bandage Etienne's shoulder, and directed, "Have one of the others saddle and ride into Branscombe at once to fetch the doctor." Half an hour of intense labor followed. More helpers came venturing timidly up the stairs. Etienne's hurt was tended and bound up. Joseph Ryle, who proved to be stunned but otherwise not greatly harmed, was carried away into another room to be cared for by the housekeeper. Such aid as Nicholas and Etienne could offer, pending the doctor's arrival, they administered to Darius. His breath was coming with such a struggle that presently Etienne said, "He would be better if he were sitting." They lifted him into his big armchair, where he did indeed seem to breathe easier. His eyes opened briefly, and he made a feeble movement of his hand to indicate that they had given him relief. Sending the man away on some further errand, Etienne closed the door after him and came to stand before the helpless man in the chair. "The doctor will be here now in not many minutes," he began, "and Monsieur Drury and I will leave you in sufficiently able hands. But before he comes, we will first conclude that small matter of business which brought us here. Are you able to understand what I say?" Darius opened his eyes and closed them again as signal that he did. Etienne stepped nearer. "You have been guilty of treason against that country of which you pretend to be a citizen, Darius Corland. Other men, for lesser offence, have forfeited their estates, and have been banished from these colonies. To recover the proof of your wrongdoing, you have been willing to connive at anything, even murder. You have contrived the destruction of a ship in your final effort to overthrow the Drury fortunes. Of these things you would, in your ordinary health, make blustering denial, but I think that you are now come to such a pass that you will not attempt to withstand the truth." He paused for a moment, not for any answer, but to give time for the man in the chair to take in all that he had said. Then he proceeded. "When you are recovered, as I do not doubt you presently will be, you are to dispose of your estates as best pleases you, and you are to take passage for England, where you are to abide. You are to lay upon yourself that sentence of banishment which, if your wrongdoing were known, the state would lay upon you. Should you fail to do this in proper time, there shall be means found of forcing you. Those two men who visited you this night would give excellent testimony in the witness-box. Is it not so? You will not for a time be the great man in another country that you have been here. But humans are somewhat like sheep the world over, and at last I have no doubt you will have shouldered your way into something like your old place of command. You will inspire awe in a few and dislike in all. But from Branscombe, from Massachusetts, from the United States, you must and shall go. Do you comprehend? Do you agree?" There was a long pause. Darius's eyes were staring open now, as he looked desperately first at Etienne, then at Nicholas. At last he bowed his head very slightly, the struggling ghost of a nod. "Then," said Etienne, "that matter being concluded, there is a certain thing which we will do for you. Nicholas, the letter." The boy drew out the missive which he had guarded and hated for so long. Etienne laid it carefully upon the bricks of the fireplace between the andirons. He took up a candle from the table and set the flame to the paper. The letter curled, shriveled, and crumpled, and in a moment was a tiny heap of gray ashes. "It does not burn as the Betsy did," observed Etienne bitterly, "for those flames destroyed a brave and splendid hope, and these only the small mean evidence of a coward's evil-doing. But the fire in both cases has done its work, and now, since I hear galloping horses on the road outside, we are free to take our leave. I bid you a very long farewell, Monsieur Darius Courland." Next morning, all of Branscombe was buzzing with the story of how robbers, tempted by Mr. Darius Courland's reputed wealth, had broken into his house and had well nigh murdered both him and his good friend Mr. Joseph Ryle. If it had not been that Master Nicholas Drury, with a companion, chanced to arrive at the house at a fortunate moment, the villains would undoubtedly have made an end of that worthy and prominent citizen. Since there was no danger now that Darius Courland would move against Etienne Bardot, he had settled down to remain at the inn for a little, until his shoulder should be somewhat healed, and until his ship, which was to go on to Halifax, should return and pick him up on her homeward voyage. The Blackbird Inn experienced an unusual amount of custom that day, for all who could find excuse came hastening thither, hoping to catch a glimpse of the foreign gentleman who had been the hero of the occasion, and whose ready sword had wounded at least one of the murderers. A very few lucky ones managed to get speech with Etienne, and heard from him a tale at which Nicholas marvelled as he stood by. All the details of the attack and struggle were so freely set forth that no one, save himself, noted the absence of any real explanation why Nicholas, or the Frenchman, or even the two rascals Tom Travers and Hezekiah Truman, came to be there. A few other townsfolk, less fortunate but still in better chance than the rest of the village, managed to observe Etienne later in the afternoon, sitting in the garden under the plum-trees, playing at chess with Thomas Drury. Dolly was standing beside the Frenchman, who was keeping his two companions in a continual gale of laughter by his lively talk. He looked pale and interesting, and carried his arm in a sling, so that those who merely saw him professed themselves quite as satisfied as though they had contrived to hold speech with him. If any of them recognized the stranger whom they had pursued through the market-place at Darius Courland's command for the sake of a price upon his head, they forbore to revive a disagreeable subject. No one who had taken part in that affair looked upon the memory as an occasion reflecting much credit upon himself. Nicholas, restless and disturbed by the coming and going, by the questioning and marvelling, had taken himself away. He had gone to inquire concerning the progress of John Ewing and his burned hands. His own scorched arm, bandaged by Dolly, gave him enough pain to make him even more unable to remain quiet. Ewing's customary lodging was in a cottage at the upper end of the village, whither Nicholas made his way, through the crooked street which skirted the edge of town, meeting few people, and allowing himself to be stopped and questioned by none. When he reached the house, he learned that the sailor had moved, for better care, to the dwelling of his married daughter, a farmhouse a mile distant from Branscombe, on the narrow, unused road which led out into the back country. In the hot stillness of the drowsy afternoon, Nicholas tramped along the quiet way. The sunshine was thick and yellow as it is only after the long heat of summer, when dust hangs everywhere in the air. He could see its full round shafts striking down through the trees which crowded the roadside, as he took his way down through a hollow, crossed a little bridge, mounted the brief incline, and knocked at Dame Margaret Pearson's door. John Ewing, brown, hard, and seasoned by a life of arduous toil, looked very much out of place sitting in the wooden chair among pillows, beside the honeysuckle-hung window. Evidently he was in much pain, of which he made very light, and was overjoyed to see Nicholas and grateful for his coming. They spent a pleasant hour together in the cheerful talk of men absorbed in the same trade. Dame Pearson, coming in with a plump baby on her arm, smiled at their incomprehensible jargon of steeving of bowsprits, of shrouds and ratlines, of what was to be expected of bluff-bowed vessels in heavy weather. She set milk and honey cakes before the distinguished guest, and observed that "Father looks already the better for talking a bit about ships." The old shipwright had wandered at last into a lengthy yarn concerning a vessel which had foundered off the Isle of May because of imperfect building. "Never an honest plank laid in her, never a true line in her anywhere, never a good full blow struck, sir, from the laying of the keel and the pinning of the garboard strakes to the setting of her mizzen topmast. It was no wonder she went down." Shadows lengthening on the window-sill warned Nicholas that it was time to be gone. He arose with some last words of good wishes and hopes that the burns would soon be healed. The old workman looked at him with pathetic, hungry eyes. "I would I could keep you here a dozen hours longer," he said. "It is slow work sitting idle and wondering when I can feel a good maul handle in my hands again, or see the spun oakum slip through my fingers. But I have no need to complain. What harm I got by the Betsy's burning is nothing to what came to you." "It was only the ordinary mischance of one who makes ventures in ships," Nicholas tried to say lightly. "No, no, sir," John Ewing responded earnestly. "We all understand what it meant to you after what had gone before. There's not one of us but has had a hard struggle to make his way in these stormy times, but we all know that it's been a long sight harder for you. Never think that there's a man amongst us that's held you to blame for what's been lost. We've all of us been braver to face our own trouble, for seeing the unflinching heart you've carried, no matter what could come." Nicholas walked away abruptly out of the house, unwilling to let the man see how he had felt those simple words. He took his homeward journey along the road, not letting himself think of any of the strange events which had filled the last few days, trying to make his attention dwell only upon the yellow autumn flowers blooming beside the road, upon little yellow-throated birds who swung and balanced on the slim twigs of the wild cherry trees. Yet he was scarcely successful, for most of the way he walked blindly with a dry choking in his throat, fighting away that question which would start up through every other thought. What am I to do now? The rutted highway followed the course of a small stream, winding down and down in a fold of the hills. By the time he reached the bridge, the town, though actually not far away, was out of sight beyond the turn in the road. He had stopped for a moment to look down at the clear brown water sliding below, when he threw back his head, startled by a strange sound, an unbelievable sound, the report of a cannon. He stood motionless, listening, unable to believe that he had heard it. Boom! It came again. 100 fancies flashed through his mind. The British come once more. The calling of the people to some terrible alarm. Not one seemed remotely possible. The third deep boom sounded as he turned his face to the village and began to run. It was so long away that he could never keep up the pace. He was forced ever and again to drop into a panting walk, then, driven by he knew not what, into running again. It seemed hours before he came to the edge of the village. The streets were empty. He could not see beyond the houses to the harbor, though it was certain that the Gunfire had come rolling in from beyond Branscombe Head. He had reached the market square, yet even here was no one, save, yes, one man hastening with long-legged strides up the street which led from the water. It was Abner Hoxie, the town crier, ringing his bell as he advanced, come to do his duty and cry the news in the proper place, even though he had never a listener. He stopped in the middle of the square, then, as he saw Nicholas running, stumbled toward him, his jaw dropped, his jangling bell fell silent. "What is it? What is it?" the boy cried. For the one time in all his career, Abner Hoxie's great voice failed him. His face worked. He made one attempt at words and then another. At last he spoke slowly and solemnly, but scarcely above a hoarse whisper. "God bless you, Nicholas Drury. It's your ship come home." End of chapter 12.